So hey there, thanks very much for checking out my videos here on YouTube. I do greatly appreciate it. We're at about, I think, 425 or 430 subscribers, which is pretty amazing considering the topics that we cover. So these are just quick little videos using my little cell phone. Again, it's an older one. We're using the internal mic, so I try to speak up as best as I can, but at the same time, because of the subscriber count and the amount of viewers that I get on this particular channel, I just don't have the cash to put out to be able to say, okay, well, let's justify an in-car camera or a special lapel mic. Once we get past that 500 subscriber mark, or we get to the 1,000 range, I might consider putting a little bit of more time and energy into these videos, or maybe spending a little more money as far as that is on equipment. So again, just be aware of that. So my apologies there. We'll try our best to make the content as rich and vibrant as possible, or as informative as we can. So again, these are just kind of quick little videos. By quick, I mean they're probably under 20 minutes. So I do apologize. I tend to go around and about on things. So you'll have to bear with me there. But I thought we were in the live sessions where we were talking about buying and selling cars in Ontario, Canada. We had a couple questions about OMVIC and the registrations required and the requirements to become a dealer or a wholesaler within the region, right? So in other words, I'm in Ontario, up in Canada. Hey there, guys. This doesn't necessarily apply to anybody else in Canada. Quebec rules are different. I think Alberta rules almost parallel this. So Alberta might actually be pretty close. The other provinces, I'm not sure. So in other words, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, and do your own research. It might be completely wrong. It might be completely right. Essentially what I'm going to do is we're going to go through each chapter in the OMVIC student manual. Wow. And I think this is a vintage piece. I actually don't think you get these anymore. I think when you spend your $285 or $350 to get your coursework, I think they send you now a link, or they give you like a little file to do on your own, so you don't physically get these. So if you're out there looking for one, they're hard to come by. And because of that, this information is probably a little bit dated. It's still applicable, but again, it's from back in the day when I took my license. So I had let it lapse because I went kind of in a different field, another direction. Still automotive, but it's one of those things where it is what it is. So what are we doing? Well, I'm on my lunch break, so we went down to the local Wendy's down here at Listowel, Ontario. It's a nice little store, very tidy, very clean, very pleasant people at the window, so I do recommend them. And we're at the Pioneer gas station, watching the traffic go by. Pretty fascinating from there. And if you want a really good cup of coffee that's always consistent, there is a on the run here that has a Casca machine, which is like a robotic coffee maker, an automated system with a beautiful little color screen on it. You can select all the coffees you like. Comes into a beautiful cardboard based cup that is terrible. I'm going to point that out. But the coffee's spectacular, just so you're aware of that. So if you're out looking for a half decent cup of coffee and you want it consistent, I'm not going to paint the picture of the other local coffee providers as inconsistent, but you've been to Tim Hortons. I can leave it at that. So, as far as that's concerned. So the robotic coffee here is actually pretty good. So just so you're aware of it. And the folks behind the counter, especially on the night shift, because I work the night shift, are always very pleasant and polite, very attentive. So let's get into the chapters. So we talked, I think, chapter 5. We jumped to chapter 16 as well, because they kind of applied to us, because we were buying a Hyundai Genesis at the time, which is available for rental on TURO. So check out below, and you can check out my TURO cars. They're in Atwood, Ontario. So you're probably not in Atwood, Ontario, but if you want to see what the Atwood stuff looks like, and you want to kind of get an idea of what the format's all about, or you're thinking of getting into TURO, check it out. It's worth kind of going over. I take a degree of pride in that. I think the photos look great. So let's take a look. So we're in chapter 2. And chapter 2, unlike chapter 5 and chapter 16, is pretty big. Chapter 2 is 12 to 14. We're looking at 20 pages, so it's a good bulk. So just so you're aware of it. So there's the chapter 2 right there in the book. So it is a sizable chapter to get into. Chapter 5 and chapter 16, not so much. They're like 2 or 3 pages. So The actual physical aspect of buying and selling a car is about 3 pages. The actual administrative and kind of the gobbledygook that you got to kind of go through, kind of related to car sales, is there. So Bob's your uncle. But let's get into it. So I thought I'd break chapter 2 into a couple little segments because, again, we're at 5:30 and I haven't really gotten to the actual topic yet. So again, I do apologize. We do kind of go around about. So who's got to take the automotive certificate course? So this is kind of the introduction to the whole thing. So, okay, so let's talk about that. So dealer registration or a sole proprietorship. Okay, so if you are the franchisee of a franchise store and you bought into it, you may not be running the day-to-day. You might just be an investor. You may not have to take the OMVIC course because, again, you're just putting money into the business. So you might be considered kind of outside that realm of, doing the actual work. It's pretty common. However, I'm going to tell you that if you are into a franchise store and you are a roundabout way invested into it, get your OMVIC license, because there could be some issues down the road when you decide that you'd like to sell your lovely aunt a lovely car inadvertently, or perhaps you get a wonderful vehicle in that you think to yourself, I'm going to park it at the dealership and let them sell it. Inadvertently, in a roundabout way, you're kind of dabbling in sales. So you might as well do it. So if you're the big money man in the back counter there going, oh, I just have the little desk upstairs, I'm not really involved in the business, I'm just the guy with the big bag of money, get your OMVIC license. It'll save a lot of issues down the road. It's not that hard. It's really easy. You have to take the full components, though, just so you're aware of it. But again, hack away at it. It's simple. Proprietorship. So if you are like the little mom and pop guy, you're going to be working the business, you need to take the course. If you're a manager at one of these particular stores where maybe you have an absentee owner, which is pretty common, you would be the one that be the licensed person, and you have to take the whole coursework as well. So managers have to kind of get stuck into this thing. If you're just a sales guy, I think you literally just do 2 chapters. Like I think it's really easy from that standpoint. Again, because you're under someone else's umbrella, they're going to assume that you're getting a babysitter that's going to be watching your contracts. You're going to have the finance manager. A host of other people are going to go through it. So the sales end of it is actually pretty easy. So if you're out there going, oh, I'm really worried and concerned that the thing is huge, language barrier is going to be a problem, a host of stuff as far as, the ability to learn things, absorb information. Don't be, if you're in the sales end of it, like if you're just working the floor, the components that you're going to deal with are very easy as far as that's concerned. If you're already in sales, you're going to know the bulk of this anyways. Back in the day, you graduate into a sales position where you start somewhere else in the dealership. You learn the terminology and the skills kind of as you go. But today you have to have the license like right out of the gate. So you have to learn it. You have to kind of memorize the book. Nice thing with it, if you memorize the book and get kind of the general layout of it, it's an open book test anyways. So it's not really that difficult as far as that's concerned. The scale level, it's not the easiest thing, but it's not hard. So sales guys out there trying it, sales girls, gals trying it, don't sweat the OMVIC test. It's going to be pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with just kind of getting used to a few things, you should be fine. So okay, so if you're old enough where you are at the dealership before January 1st, 2007, you may not need to do the OMVIC course. So odds are there's nobody out there. So that's like the grandfather point, right? So I find that they mention it, it's funny because that fellow would be, who would be, there's a couple dealers out there that have been in it for that long. So yeah, they may not have their OMVIC license, but I doubt it. So okay, so they also give a couple basic stuff, like for instance, if you're in the back end, so if you're in the back room of a major franchise store and you're like bookkeeping, accounting, or you're the parts guy or you're warranty administrator, you don't need an OMVIC course. So they really break it down to the front of the store is what's required for OMVIC. So just be aware of that. So you might end up in an environment where maybe you did start out in the parts counter, or maybe you did start out doing payroll and administration. You thought, I want to go try and sell cars to a brother or uncle or a nephew or something in the family. You may want the idea of visiting your OMVIC license if you decide to make that somewhat of a permanent move. So, and a lot of folks do. So what happens in the car business, what I have found, so you'll get somebody who'll come in, who'll work in kind of the extended range. They're not really in the car business, but they're in a field that kind of is related. So they're in a bookkeeper would be a good example. So an entry-level bookkeeper or administrator will look and kind of go, hey, I've seen some of the paychecks that come through. I can go sell a car. And they get confidence and they slowly get into it. The local Mercedes shop that I worked at was very much like that, where you went on the floor and there was a kind of a collage of misfits that you kind of look and kind of go, none of these folks have car experience. But the gentleman that owned the dealership at the time liked to promote from within. And you could always kind of skill up a little bit, especially with the Mercedes brand. So they had a lot of online training for makes and models. They had a lot of support. So it was one of those things where you didn't really need to know like very much to really get into it. And when you're selling a Mercedes, you are selling the car, like that is, there's salesmanship involved in that. But to the most part, it's a personality thing. So in other words, you're really kind of creating an environment that's going to make the customer feel comfortable. They're going to want to buy the car from you. The atmosphere is different than like the run-of-the-mill car dealership. It's a little bit above. So think of it as like you could go buy your watch at the local store, or you can go to a Burke's, right? You're going to get it's not that the process is very different. It's just the fact that it's a different clientele you're dealing with. It's a different feel. So it's a whole different environment when it comes to selling the actual car itself. But the cars themselves, if you can learn them, it's not that hard. But if you don't have the personality or the skill set, learning the details isn't going to help you. So it's one of those things where I was at, the boss there liked to promote when he found someone that was comfortable to deal with, someone who had a nice personality, someone who was forward and upfront and honest, seemed to do really well there, right? So it was one of those things where he would just kind of try them out. And if that would be Mike. Hey, Mike, if you're listening, appreciate that. But again, it's one of those things where it's a different environment. So you have to know how to dress, how to maintain your desk. I've visited this before. Work ethic, getting to work on time, things along that line. So again, if you're getting into the car business from the back door, you may need to do that, right? Registration. Okay, so you got to pay them. Yeah, so required payment in full. I have to complete the course. Applicants, employees to retain the active salesperson registration. Okay, so this is interesting. So they kind of put these little blurbs off to the side on there. So if you leave the dealership after you've got your license, you have 60 days before the license is terminated and you have to refresh it again, go through the coursework. That's kind of the norm. So finding some place to park your license if you leave the dealership that you're at, not a problem from where the level where we're at now. Okay, so they get into, this is the section where if you are the dealer, the owner, operator, or franchisee, they kind of tell you about registered, unregistered salespeople. So they really push the fact that if you got somebody on the floor and they're presenting the car, that you have to have them registered through OMVIC, right? So if you got the occasional lot guy filling in for the salesperson on the GM floor, or your fly-by-night little car dealership, you got the nephew in for a couple weeks on holidays, they really need to be licensed, or at least have the process of going through the licensing. Okay, and then we're on page 16, where they basically just tell you the process of how to fill out the application to get your OMVIC license. Okay, so, and then we're on to page 17, where they tell you that once you have your license, yay, they're going to send you a little placket for the wall. It has to go on the wall. So when people come into your office, they'll go, hey, look, he graduated the coursework. He's actually a registered salesperson. A lot of places actually don't do that. They'll put them up with the mechanics in the foyer. Just it's kind of just they're there, and you have to carry along your salesman license, which strangely enough doesn't have a photograph. So I always thought that was weird when I had them. So you'll get a little tiny little card that says I am an OMVIC registered seal. It's pretty straightforward. It's nothing that complicated. It's very simple from that aspect. Okay, refusals of registration. So they get into this one as well. Okay, so number one, the big reason why they're going to decline your license. Can't reasonably expect you to be financially responsible in the conduct of business. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means if you're going through an emotional breakup, no, that's not what it means. It means that if you're currently going through a bankruptcy or you have a trustee that's representing you, you might not be able to represent yourself properly. So you would have to talk to your trustee about that. Does that mean that it's cut and dry that they'll decline you because you have some financial issues? Not necessarily. But it's one of those things where you may need to clarify it from that standpoint. It's one of those things that you have to have a conversation with somebody on OMVIC first. Okay, if you've got a great big pile of judgments against you, so if you've committed a degree of fraud out there and you're coming from maybe aluminum siding or something else along that line, where you've shown a track record of being really, 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 really dirty in business, they're probably not going to approve you. Just make that really apparent. Past conduct. So again, this is where if there's issues when they pull your file at OMVIC, because they're going to do a check, if it looks like you've had like mortgage fraud or credit fraud, or again, you've got judgments going on, or you've just come out of prison, so you might have some issues with that. You might want to call them directly and just have a conversation and say, hey, I would like to get into this field. I've turned over a new leaf. How do I need to convince you to do that? I've experienced some salespeople that have had issues in the past, and they've had to have little riders put onto the actual OMVIC license and said, look, we'll let you be there, but good news, the manager is going to basically sign your contract on the sales end of it and verify that everything you've told the client is true for the first year, right? So I've seen that happen. I've also seen it where they've said no, right out, definitely not. So it's one of those things where it really does depend on the situation and who's looking at the actual filing for the licensing. But again, it's one of those things where you need to call OMVIC and address those issues before you go through the process. So you might as well save yourself the $280 or $350, whatever it's at now, subject to the timeline you're watching this video, and just kind of say, okay, am I in the realm of the potential of getting declined? So just be aware of that. A lot of times, if you went through a divorce and you had issues like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and they've kind of almost resolved themselves, a lot of times they'll let that kind of go. But it's one of those things where you do have to have a discussion with them. Okay, so the other one is applicants and registration. So if you've made some outlandish statements on your previous OMVIC licensing, so we're not talking to you because you've already gone through the process already, but you've gone your 60 days, it's now gone, and you're getting into another dealership. You made some weird false statements, like maybe you didn't tell them you had a trustee representing you. Maybe you didn't say, hey, I've got a judgment from Rogers there because of an old cell phone bill, or a host of stuff that they may actually go back and say, hey, we caught you on that one. They may decline you on the next licensing renewal. So just be aware of that. Application registration has failed to comply with terms and conditions of the rest. Yeah, so in other words, if you went ahead and you put your application in 6 months after you've been selling cars and you've been at a franchise store, it's a shame on the franchise store, actually. They shouldn't have allowed that. If you grew into it naturally, and you're at a mom and pop store, I can kind of see that a little bit, some gray area, but they're going to be mildly annoyed with that. So just be aware of that. So if you've been shadowing a salesperson, or you've been just doing it on your own, good example would be if you were a curber. This might be a reason why they decline you. So, and that's one of the reasons why, again, we had that discussion on the as-is sale in the last video about curbers. We had it in chapter 5 as well. So if you do want to get into the car business, that's kind of your cut and dry, you want to do it, don't go the curber route, because it may torpedo you
in never getting an OMVIC license, which means you're never going to be able to get into a garage registry, which means you're never going to be able to get a car dealership, which means you're never going to be able to, it's a snowball effect. So if you're going to do that type of business, be aware it can affect you long term. So, and a lot of folks start out that way. It's one of those really weird things. Back in the day, if you were a car salesman, normally been one of those things where you were doing it in your backyard forever and a day, and you decide to go and make it a career. Today, that's a no-no. So be aware of that, especially if they have a judgment against you or someone's complained in the past over a vehicle that you sold when you were curbing cars, which is a no-no. So just be aware of that. And it's the one thing they can actually really, really nail you on. So be aware of that. Okay, and then they kind of get into page 18. It's kind of a longer legal version of what we just talked about. So just be aware of that. They don't really outline like an example. They just kind of say these are the statements that might do. Again, in plain English, essentially, if you've been a bad person financially, and you've got judgments, and you've been maybe caught a couple times curbing cars, and maybe you made a couple statements that weren't quite accurate, you're going to have an issue with your OMVIC license. So, but again, contact them, because sometimes, and again, I've experienced it where I've had salespeople, and they've had some real nightmarish personal issues, and they've kind of passed through that, where they've had the option to say, hey, you know, we're going to pair you up with somebody, especially if it's a franchise store, because really the sales guy is going to have to get the manager to sign off on the contract anyways. The finance manager has to sign off on the contract anyways. So it's one of those things where they can babysit you a little while, and usually that's the first year. Okay, interested in an associate person. So who else needs to get into the licensing process? And this is where we get into that, baby steps into it. Like you've been working the business for a year, and inadvertently you just end up being a salesperson. You should have just got the license right out of the gate. So anyone who has a benefit or interest in the business. So again, that would be that money bags guy that just showed up that's a silent partner, should be on OMVIC, right? Because they might sell a car. Okay, exercising control either directly or indirectly over the dealer's salespersons. So if you've got somebody at the desk, and you'll see this a lot in bigger franchise stores, where you might have a team of like 17 salespeople, and they kind of run it almost like a call center. So they've got a management system in place. Well, the folks that are managing the managing system, they realistically should have an OMVIC license. Like that should be like done. So if you've got yourself a little call center set up with your salespeople, and you have like a head desk where you've got somebody managing the calls and just doing the process, they really are dealing with the public, and they are dealing with your clients. They should have an OMVIC license. So just be aware of that. Person provided or may have provided financially, either directly or indirectly, to the business. So your brother-in-law gave you some money. So maybe he's personally involved in the business, shows up on Friday to help you out. Probably should have an OMVIC license. You're doing him a favor anyways. Get the license. Okay, and this is a little harder because it's going to be more corporate stuff. So if you're into one of the directors, in other words, you've got yourself all lined up as a corporation, and you've got a director that's on the board, well, technically they probably should have an OMVIC license. That's actually not common. If you've set it up where you've got a business model where you are basically registered as a corporation, a lot of times you'll find that it'll be wives, spouses, close relatives. They'll sit on the boards. They don't necessarily have any real involvement in the business per se. They might do a little bit of maybe marketing, if that, but they're usually running the bigger back end. They're dealing with the mortgage of the property. They're dealing with services like electrical. They're doing more structural stuff. They don't typically have the OMVIC license, so, and they don't usually get involved. But if you are on the floor and you go, okay, well, what's the deal with the four guys that show up every 3 months to look over the money and count cars? They're probably on the board. So Okay, so voting trusts. So this is a weird one. I haven't experienced that. Voting trusts are typically a little different animal than anything that I've been into, so I can't really speak on that one. So I'm going to assume that, again, you're corporated and you put stock out. Stockholders, I guess depending on how active they are, they may have to have an OMVIC license. I'm going to assume it's based on a percentage. Like if you're like a 10% holder and you're like distanced from it, I don't know. If you're out there and you have a percentage in a car business, and I know it's when I was working at Hyundai, when you're management and you're on management on the floor, so you're a sales manager, you're performance based. So you might get a 3% stock in the company, but it's not really a voting stock. It's more performance oriented. So you get a little cut of the profit based on 3%, but it's not based on 3% of the total sales or total departments. It's based on 3% of total sales on, and this is after all the expenses are taken out. So really it can be a sizable amount of money, but it's not really, it's going to be a percentage of the overall sales on the sales floor. You're typically not getting a cut of the mechanics in the back. You're not getting a cut of the service desk. So it's kind of a loaded 3% of the business because they've broken it up into subcategories. So I've only experienced that. I've never really been to the upper level with a partner or with like as a worker bee to say, hey, you get 3% of the overall business or 5%. And typically if you get booted out the door, I do believe those stocks or that percentage gets kicked back into the owner. So I don't necessarily think it's really a true here's a bag of stocks for you. It doesn't work that way. But again, if you were performance oriented, you were in the back and you said, okay, well I get 3.5% overall business because I'm the bookkeeper and accountant. It's just a nice little bonus. I think you need an OMVIC license. So I think what we're talking here, basically, if you are associated or around, or you walk through the car dealership and you drive income from them and you're into a larger franchise, you really should, for your protection, like as a worker, you should have an OMVIC license. And you'd just be doing the sales end anyways. And again, it's a really easy one to do. So it's not, if you are a chartered accountant and well educated, you're going to look at this and go, this is nothing. Like boom, you probably get the book, take a day with it, go do the test, you'd probably pass, right? So just be aware of that from that standpoint. Licensing appeal. Okay, so the tribunal. So in other words, if you've had issues and you're going, okay, I need to sit down and talk to somebody, you can go in and talk to OMVIC and present your case. So it's one of those things where, again, if you're going through or you went through a bankruptcy, or you went through a bad divorce, or you've had judgments against you because of a situation, that's where you can sit down and go in and talk to them as a group and try and present your licensing options. So again, I've only had one person that's gone through this. I think that was Donovan. Like, we're talking a long time ago, and he had a host of issues. Like, it wasn't just financial. I think they declined him, if I remember correctly, but then he went back a year later and then reapplied and then sat down with the tribunal again and then said, oh, I resolved some of the issues. Then he ended up getting his license, right? So they're not inflexible is what I'm getting at. Okay, and they'll give you a 2-year window. Again, if they declined your license, to reapply. And if you've inadvertently been declined, you can actually provide material, explain the circumstances. Again, that's where that line of communication comes in. Registration exemptions. We're getting up to 30 minutes, so we're going to do a separate video on the exemptions. So again, I do appreciate it, and that's the basics of Chapter 2. Why you'd get a license, or what part of the business you would be into. So if you're on the sales floor, you definitely need a license. If you're in the back 40 and you're working on bookkeeping and accounting, not necessarily. If you're part of the franchise and you're an investor, a really good idea. You don't necessarily have to do it, but you should. You'd be taking the dealer course. You might as well get it done. It's cheap from your perspective because you've got huge amounts of money bags. And if you're one of the folks that are like, you've made it into a corporation and the wife is in the corporation and so yada, yada, and there's a bunch of family members, get them all. They don't have to be, but get them all done. Like really. There's some gray area there, but just do it. Like it's so easy. They'd be taking the smaller portion, like the small course. Do it. Essentially, if you've got a big franchise store and you're running it, try and get as many people as you can on that OMVIC program, like done. So you can say to yourself, look, in the event that you have a problem on the sales floor and there's an issue, you can go and tap somebody's shoulder that you trust and like, and maybe fill in until you can find somebody to replace the person that you thought didn't work out, right? So that's really important. Otherwise, one day you might walk in and say to yourself, and it happens, where you have a low group of performers and you've got 2 or 3 sales guys that have basically dominated the force and destroyed everything on your floor. It's gotten sour and dirty. It can happen. I've experienced that on a few places where you kind of go, no one's letting the sunshine in anymore, right? And you have to do a change. And sometimes it's easier just to be able to say, okay, guys, Wednesday, everyone's gone. We're going to have an assessment. Thursday, good news, your receptionist who has an OMVIC license is going to sit in on the floor. Good news, the bookkeeper accountant is now going to be sharing some of that responsibility. Good news, my nephew is licensed, so the nephew is going to come in for a little bit. The business manager might have a junior, so you can say good news, the junior's going on the sales floor. So you can kind of rotate out and try and change that negativity. So again, if you're running a franchise store, it's a really good idea to make sure that everybody has an OMVIC license. Is it a requirement in every role in the dealership? It is not, but it's such an easy get for the majority of people. You should just do it. Okay, I hope that helped you out a little bit. 30 minutes a little long. I do apologize, but chapter 2 is a big one. We're going to talk about some more chapter 2 in the next one.